Welcome to the Smart Connector podcast, which helps entrepreneurs generate more impact, wealth and success, attract others for all the right reasons, and become a smart connector, the architect of your amazing business and life. This podcast is sponsored by Virtual Non-Execs, the world's #1 peer-to-peer board advisor community, which connects thousands of investors, entrepreneurs, and advisors globally. Welcome to the Smart Connector podcast. I have a wonderful guest for you, as ever, Julian Roberts. It's great to have you here, Julian.
Good to see you, Jane. Thank you for inviting me on. Looking forward to this conversation.
Definitely, me too. So Julian is an executive coach with a focus on resilience in individuals and teams. And he's also a podcast host of the wonderful and very highly rated Helping Organizations Thrive podcast, which I was recently a guest on too, talking about my cancer journey and how I recovered and thrived in the wake of that. So Julian, it is so good to be able to reconnect and talk about this incredibly important topic, because the need for resilience is always there in business, whether it's organizations, employees, teams, boards, or whether you're an entrepreneur and a seller of your own services. We all need to develop these skills, don't we?
No, we do. And I think people forget that it's not just a thing for pandemic season, which I know resilience was talked about a lot then. I was talking about it before the pandemic, but it's needed in every aspect of society, really. And whether you're a teenage kid through to somebody older who's got a business or working in the corporate, we all need resilience, because life is difficult and there are as many challenges to face, and we need to be able to overcome those in a way that's really helpful for us all.
Definitely. And you mentioned the pandemic, and obviously this is an event in fairly recent history, so everybody remembers it. And what was interesting to me is that, having spoken to many people and their experiences of the pandemic, I think a lot of people had really, really struggled. Businesses failed in many instances because of that. It was certainly a very difficult time for a lot of people. But I also know people who they said they had a great time and they really enjoyed it, because if they were on furlough, let's say if they had their salary being paid and they were able to spend time at home and get a dog and have fun with their family and do all of those things that they hadn't been able to do before, then there is a sizable contingent of people that actually seem to enjoy it. And the reason why I brought that up is because I wanted to ask you, how influential are the people around you in terms of resilience? Is it harder if you have people around you who are not struggling and who seem to be having a great time if you're going through those difficulties?
Yeah, it's a good point to mention, actually, those people around you. They say you're the sum of the 5 people that are around you, some sort of quote on that. But I think we're heavily influenced by the people around us, whether that's our family, friends, people we work with. And that can be really positive. It can be really encouraging. They can be really for you. They can really be people who inspire you. And I think often people forget that we are influenced by other people, by what we see and the role models that are around us. And that really is what helps us. And so if you've got people around you who are, what I would say, more resilient in how they play things out, or have got a more positive mindset, just subconsciously you'll role model and you'll get influenced by that in a positive way. Role modeling is the most powerful way to influence anybody, whether it's as a leadership in an organization through to your children, because it's people see exactly what you're doing, and it's more impactful than just what you're saying or telling somebody in that sense. So having people around you who are not only perhaps ahead of you in some ways in terms of your growth and your mindset is so important. So it's really important to be mindful who is around you, but also the input that people have on you as well, because you want people who will encourage you, people before you, and also people who will challenge you in a way that's wanting you to grow and wanting you the best for you, not challenging you for the sake of challenging you. And I think you want those sort of people around you. And I think we had that conversation about how on my podcast with you about making sure you have people around you who are there for you and will help you and enable you to become a better version of yourself rather than staying stuck or even going backwards.
Yes. And they say that emotions are contagious, right? So that backs up that point that you were just making, to be very selective about the people around you. But of course, that's in an ideal world, isn't it? Particularly if you are in an organization or even as an entrepreneur, there will be people that come into your life or your business every single day, and they might be bringing some negativity, or alternatively, they might just not have the challenges that you have. And they might be completely oblivious to, let's just say, if you are going through a hard time, it might mean nothing to them, and they might be having a great time. As I said, that's why I brought up this example of the pandemic, because some people will thrive just because the circumstances are good for them, and some people will thrive despite the circumstances. So I guess what I wanted to ask is, if you are surrounded by people who perhaps they're well-intentioned, but they don't have the struggles that you have, is it harder to be resilient in those situations?
I think for me, resilience is about building your own sort of habits and creating resilience for yourself. I believe resilience is a skill. Now, there's an influence of people around you, and that helps you in terms of the environment you're in, but it's a skill that you can develop, just like a muscle. You can help grow it. And it's not just some people are more resilient than others. I think some people have honed it, and perhaps some people have had scenarios or challenges that have enabled them to become more resilient. But there's a choice. You had cancer, and you had choices along the way of how you're going to react or respond accordingly. And I think we all have those choices. Some people choose to try to overcome it, try to create a mindset, try to help do daily things that will help enable them to overcome it. So I think it's building in practices. And I always encourage people to sort of try and exercise that sort of mindset, exercise that muscle of resilience. And you can do that despite who's around you and how tough it might be. Because frankly, some people are in situations that are really dark and really hard, but actually they can shine through that. And that's doing things like, things like practicing gratitude. It sounds like such a really simple thing. And what I love about sort of gratitude is anybody can do it, and anybody can think of something they're really grateful for. But the amazing thing about things like gratitude is there's some really physiological things that happen. When you actually sort of grateful for something, you release dopamine, you release serotonin, and these are like feel good emotions to make you feel good. And when you start feeling good, you start to see things more positively. So those challenges, you start to see the silver lining, you start to see the ideas that are more creative, and it enables you to then think a bit differently about perhaps those challenges that you're faced with. And so simple things like that, it's just building in those little habits of personal ways of building that resilience. And then you can fight through all those things that may get thrown at you despite the people around you and what they think of you.
Yes, exactly. So I guess the message that is coming through is that to be bulletproof almost against all these adversities, or against, the comparison trap, which of course is always tempting for people to fall into, all of those things, whatever life throws at you, we have to learn to maintain that attitude of gratitude that keeps us on an even keel, regardless of what's happening around.
Yeah, totally. But there's other things we can do. I mean, I do an ice bath every day. And I do, cold showers more in the summer because, ice bath gets quite warm in the summer. And so sort of from now on, I go in the sea every week. And it's another way of, it's finding different ways that work for you. But for me, going in an ice bath, this morning it was like 13 degrees. On Monday it was 8 degrees. It's still pretty cold. And anything below 15 degrees will have an impact. But what it's training me is, I think we've created a real comfort about us in what we do in life. And so when we get something that's quite difficult, whether that's a business thing or a work thing or a health thing. I think we find that quite hard because we're so used to comfort. And I'm not belittling what people might be going through right now, because things are challenging. But I think we've created comfort by putting yourself in a position of discomfort, like going into something very cold for a couple of minutes a day, and it is discomfort. It sort of starts to train your body that actually, when you go in, actually things are not so bad because you can overcome and deal with things like that. When you go into cold water, you start to create obviously you get a stress response to it, but your body gets used to it and starts to realize actually that's okay, and you deal with it. And I've found my stress levels have come down because I feel that, I think there's some facts, actually some studies, that my stress sort of trigger of stress threshold has gone higher because I'm doing it on a daily basis, pushing it higher. And so I need other things to push it higher, if you know what I mean. So I don't get so stressed out. I don't go into a stress response in a situation. I come out very clear thinking. I'm very mindful. And also you get a release of dopamine equivalent to potentially snorting cocaine. Not that I've ever snorted cocaine, but it's equivalent to, and it's also prolonged. So it's over that 3 or 4 hours. So I have this sort of, not so high all the time, but certainly this buzz. And it's things like that, putting in practices that will make you, when you go into scenarios. I used to find networking events quite stressful and uncomfortable, and never used to like going into them, and which is fairly normal. I think most people, and these have been talking about in-person ones. And so since I've been doing cold water the last couple of years, I don't get that at all. I walk in, not in an arrogant way, but as you said, the word bulletproof, I feel this sense of, what can bother me? I've just gone in some cold water this morning. This can't stress me out at all. I've almost gone beyond that. And it's enabled me to be more calmer, more relaxed in situations. So that's one example. There's other ways of creating that sort of habit of building that resilience within your life.
And it's interesting that you should talk about the physical stuff, because I've always found, well, I discovered Pilates, I suppose, a few years ago, maybe about 8 years ago, something like that. And Pilates for me, I find, because a lot of it is to do with stretching. And of course, when the body is tense, that's when we feel a physical sense of stress, isn't it? And of course, that physical and the mental is connected, no doubt about it. And so I've noticed that when I go into a lot of stretching and I do the Pilates stuff, for me, that is very, very, very impactful in terms of reducing my stress levels. I can't say that I'm a master at this. I'm sure that there are 101 other things that I could be doing. But I mean, we all have to find some ways, don't we, to actually, counteract the stress that is there, as you said, as part of daily life.
Yeah,
and
totally.
For me, I know a lot of people that do yoga, they also find that very helpful. So there is something about actually stretching out the body and elongating those muscles as well. That's a great help. But what I wanted to get into, Julian, is why did you specifically choose this topic to create a podcast on? Why do you incorporate this into your coaching? Where did it all start for you? Why is this topic so important for you personally?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. It probably stems back to, I've had, prior to becoming a coach, which was about 6.5 years ago, I used to do lots of long distance type running and Ironman sort of distant triathlons, and I love the thing of doing something, pushing your body beyond the limits or your perceived limits. I'm not massively athletic, but I used to just started off doing 5K, 10K. And sort of marathon and then ultra marathons, and then started off building up to sort of Ironman distance triathlons as well. And I was fascinated by the whole process of pushing your body and training your body to go beyond that sort of painful and building those sort of almost resilient type of practices within that to enable you to keep going when things are really tough. And we're talking physical challenge here, but almost becomes a mental challenge when you're halfway through a sort of 60 odd K run and it's boiling hot, the hottest day of the year that you didn't think was going to happen. And how do you deal with that? And I started to realize I needed some ways to try and reframe things visualization, all those little things to try and help me get through it. And I just got interested in the whole piece of resilience and how I did things. And I look back and think, wow, I did some awesome things. And the reflection on that was this sort of passion for resilience. And I started to just, and I think the pandemic sort of accelerated that. I was talking about it a lot, quite interested in it. And I started to see how people were reacting, how people were sort of finding it difficult. And on the back of that, I then started to really learn more about it, understand more about it. And then that passion has just become part of my coaching practice. I coach CEOs, I coach business owners and teams. And it's not just all about resilience, but there's this thread of resilience to enable people to become more resilient as a leader or more resilient as an organization. And then the podcast became out of me having conversations with leaders, helping them switch from a survival mindset to more of a sort of thriving mindset. But I wanted to expand that to organizations. And I thought, I want to help organizations thrive. And that's the phrase I kept using. So on that, I started to launch it. And I've got a passion for leadership and resilience. And I think it's hand in hand now. And I say it's not just for pandemic, it's for all the time. We need to be resilient. We've got many, economic and political things going on right now, whether that's in the UK or the rest of the world. And it can be quite overwhelming. And I think we need to, whether it's individually or as an organization, and we need to have that resilience of how we're going to navigate all that uncertainty, all that difficulty and all that failure as well. And how do you work that through and how do you bring teams along with you? So it's just that passion of helping people to be overcomers, really.
Yeah. And I'm interested in you talking about helping organizations thrive and helping teams thrive and so on, because helping organizations thrive, that is a really big topic, isn't it?
It's huge.
It really is. So I'm really interested to know about the type of work that you do with organizations and how you can actually help them thrive.
Yeah, I mean, there's many ways I can do this, and I tend to work within teams and helping, with a focus on building team resilience, that the team can then become really focused and successful in what they do, but also help them to navigate those difficulties, whether that's internal difficulties or external difficulties. And what I tend to center a lot of things on, and this is individually and teams as well, is getting people to get real clarity of their purpose. And it sounds, not a cliche thing. Why is that important? Because if you've got clarity of purpose, whether that's individually or as a team, and this is an example. I was in the pandemic, actually. I dealt with the CEO who was, when all the lockdown stuff was kicking off, and everybody was in a state of shock, not knowing what to do, how we're going to navigate this, what we're going to, sort of tell our teams and everything else. And I told this CEO, I said, look, I knew he was quite purpose-driven. I said, your purpose, your mission, or your vision of your business, I said, does it change what's going on in terms of the sort of pandemic? He said, well, not really, because it's still what we want to achieve. And I think, purposes are quite bigger than you anyway, and bigger than situations. And so I said, okay, well, if nothing changes, go back to your teams, get them to talk about and focus on what the purpose is of that team, of that organization, and to get some inspiration. Because despite what is going on in terms of the reality, your North Star, your purpose doesn't change. And this will help you navigate, and it takes you a bit more out of the situation, makes you a bit more stand back. And then their team started to stand back and go, okay, we've still got this bigger purpose, but what the only thing that's changed is how we're going to do it because of all the lockdown and everything else. And so they started to talk about how they're going to do things differently, different ways of working, different way of connecting with their clients. And they started to map out a plan and a way of overcoming. And so what they did, they got clarity with their purpose to think, stand back, be more strategic, and almost go outside of the problem that was in front of them and work on ways of actually navigating that. And that enabled them to change the way they did things and to be, I guess, resilient and agile and adaptable in the face of something quite massive, really, in terms of a challenge. So that's sort of thing I might do with a team. That's one example, or just taking them on a journey of resilience and start to build that within those teams.
Yeah, and I really like that because It's also about caring, isn't it? It's about caring and actually appreciating what is the driver, really, of feeling good about your work. Because that really does come back to purpose, doesn't it? I think that is the driver. If I was just flailing about thinking, right, what shall I do today to be successful? Then I probably wouldn't do half the things that I do now. But I think when you have a team, then they've got to balance those personal agendas, haven't they, with the agendas of let's just say the greater good. And sometimes without that attention or without that focus, the greater good, if you like, the purpose of the team or the organization or whatever can eclipse the purpose of the individual. So I'm sure that there's a balance that has to be found.
And obviously not everybody's organizational purpose won't align to everybody, but generally you should go to an organization and have a broad alignment with what they're trying to achieve. And that's what you want, because and purpose is inspirational. It creates engagement, it creates excitement, it creates innovative thinking and everything else. It's an inspiration. It's far beyond where you are at. It could be 5, 10, 20 years ahead and almost slightly unattainable. It's quite how do your hands reach, but it's something that's like a North Star, and they say it keeps you focused. But also what it does, it stops you going off tangents, stops going off those shiny new objects that pop up all the time for new businesses, especially startups, especially small businesses who get very excited about the latest new thing. So yeah, it's really important.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. So do you tend to work more for startups or scale-ups or larger organizations? I mean, who's your kind of typical client then, Julian?
It tends to be SMEs, so anybody from 1 up to sort of 250 sort of employees, and my sweet spot's probably anywhere between 30 and 100 employees. Where I might work with some of the senior teams or some other teams, or work some individuals and leadership within that context as well.
That's fantastic. So, Julian, what's one of your favorite resilience stories then? When you think about, I mean, you must be, obviously you read around this topic, you've interviewed a lot of people. Do you have a particularly inspirational story that you'd like to share?
Crumbs. Okay. I'm trying to think now. I think that it's probably that, I was trying to think, that pandemic one with that team who were in a state of shock, as we all were, and then literally giving the advice to the CEO literally to talk about purpose, get focused on purpose, and use that as a guiding principle. And then that turned around the team within a matter of days, which for me was pretty inspirational in terms of that. But there was a lady I coached as well, just as an individual. She came to me and wanted to develop her mental toughness and resilience. And she wanted to run 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. And so I worked with her for a number of months to sort of build some mental hacks for her to enable her to do that. So using what she came up with and me sort of guiding her. And so, yeah, she did that. So she went from, Antarctica, South Africa, Australia, Dubai, Spain, South America, and then North America, 7 days. And it's incredible, absolutely incredible. And so she did it, it was actually February this year. So
really?
It's pretty, and she does a lot of stuff like this, but this was like way out of her comfort zone. And hence why she came to me and said, look, could you help me? Because I just feel I need it to actually do this. And she wasn't like an super athletic in that sense. So a lot of it was all about that, down to the mind.
Wow. So what actually drove her to do something like that? Because I couldn't see myself doing something like that in a million years. There's got to be a really strong driver to set yourself a challenge like that.
Yeah, she does a lot of this. She's a mental health advocate. She came out she was in the army many years ago and came out because of mental health problems. In fact, tried to kill herself at one point, tried to commit suicide. And so based on that's become her purpose, is to then be a mental health advocate, to help other people. And she does lots of challenges like this. And so that was her purpose. And we talked a lot about that because that was the thing when you're going through something really tough, like she did along the way, remind yourself of why you're doing this, the why behind it, the purpose behind it, to enable you to keep going, to keep make another step in front and keep pursuing the end result of all that. So yeah, that was the reason for why she does what she does.
Amazing. Wow. What a woman. So, it's interesting that you were talking about leaders and leadership as well, because leadership and resilience are very entwined, aren't they? I mean, I was thinking as you were talking, I was thinking about somebody like Nelson Mandela, for example, who spent all those years imprisoned in South Africa for essentially standing up against apartheid, which of course was a very unfair system to begin with. And of course, because of that, and because of the way he was when he came out, he became not just an inspiration to the whole world, but also he was really the living embodiment of resilience, wasn't he?
Oh, totally.
And so, I'm just kind of interested to explore that topic. By becoming more resilient, do you become a better leader, is the question.
Well, in essence, in the short answer, yes. And the reason why, because resilience, I think it's going back to what resilience really is. And it's, for me, the definition is not just about how you overcome something, which is obviously the elements. And it's not just down to grit and determination, because I think that becomes quite a toxic way of viewing resilience. It's just plowing through, because it's more than just plowing through. Because when you get knocked down or you face a challenge, is taking the time to reflect and look at the learning at that point as well. And so it's almost like understanding your resources. Have you done this before? What else can I do? And use it as an opportunity to learn and get back up and go, I'm going to do things differently. And I think as leaders, I think you need to be in a position where you're constantly learning how you lead, learning how you interact, learning how you communicate. And I think resilience enables you to do that in a way that's quite impactful with your teams. But also with resilience, you've got to be incredibly agile, adaptable, and also incredibly sort of to try new things. Because, if you've faced a challenge, if you keep trying to get over it in the same way, you're not going to get over it, because it just keeps getting knocked down. So you have to do things differently. You have to do things in a creative way. And doing things differently sometimes is uncomfortable. And it takes a bit of what is called courage, where you're stepping out of that sort of comfort zone a little bit and trying something new you've never tried before to try and overcome a challenge. And I think if you do that in leadership, that means you're going to start to create new opportunities, new ways of working, but also inspire those around you and enable other people to do the same thing. And so I think being resilient has huge amounts of impact on your leadership. And as we went back to right at the very start, people observe you, and observation and role modeling is the most powerful way to influence anybody. And so if you're resilient, which means you're agile, you're learning, you're overcoming, you're bringing other people with you, then people start to see that, and that starts to have an impact on those around you as well.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is this whole concept of toxic positivity, because that's a kind of interesting subject, isn't it? And I remember, actually my ex was in recovery from drugs and alcohol. So he used to go to these meetings, and he used to say that the people who were the toxic positives people used to annoy him, because they were the people who everything was great, everything was rosy, life was always good. And of course, people would sometimes go to those meetings really to share some of the challenges that they and the struggles that they've been going through, and actually get some identification. But at the same time, you don't want to be somebody who's kind of wallowing in victimhood. So where is the balance really between toxic positivity and, crushing victimhood? How do you avoid both of those extremes?
Yeah, it can be difficult, can't it? I think in those situations, I think for me, we need to be firmly rooted in reality. In whatever you're doing, and even with, talking to that CEO who had the challenge of pandemic, that's the reality where we are. The stretch and the balance was that purpose piece, which then created a bit of a void, bit of almost a gap to fill, really. And it was that sort of stretch. So I think it's making sure that you are in reality, but having a view on life that is optimistic. I think we also need to be able to be vulnerable as well, and to say, that we are struggling as well. And I think this is where leaders probably struggle most, because they think they need to know all the answers. And
Yeah.
it's okay not to know all the answers, isn't it? I mean, I think sometimes we think as a leader, well, I'm a leader, I need to know how to lead. But actually, in the pandemic, nobody probably knew how to do it, to be honest, properly. And it's okay not to know. And there's other people who will help you and those around you. But I always, it's that balance, because obviously that whole sort of, making sure it's all going to get through all this, all be positive talk. To me, it's not rooted in reality. And I think it's not being negative. It's just find out where you are, where do you want to go, and what do you need to do to get there, and use those ways of steps to really help you overcome those situations. And have those people around you who will, I guess, challenge you and sort of check you and be accountable to ensure that you're not being the sort of wallowing sort of victim, or the just hi-fi, everything's all great and we'll get through this type of mindset, because that's not very helpful, is it?
Yeah. I think with the thing about both of those extremes is that it's in a way, I mean, I'm thinking about somebody that I know, and I used to have these conversations with him, and he would not allow himself to feel a negative emotion, because for him, the way that he saw mindset and resilience as just, okay, I feel a negative emotion and straight away I absolutely crush it. I just I push it down and I push it to one side. And I always used to say to him, look, you're a man, okay? You were brought up maybe with this conditioning. You went to boarding school, which he did at a very young age. I went to boarding school. I know if you're a little boy that goes to boarding school and you're there at the age of 8, it has a very, very damaging kind of psychological impact, right? You are being that little boy that went to boarding school, that you are not expressing your feelings because you're not being allowed, you're not allowing yourself to feel them. And actually your emotions are strength. And I think the difference maybe between, some women and men is that nobody's ever told us that it's not okay to feel feelings. We're allowed to be emotional. We are. And we talk about our feelings to other women very easily and naturally. And so I think actually owning our own feelings is a very good thing. This is just my opinion. And then I think sometimes, and I notice this in myself, sometimes I have to recalibrate and actually say, if I feel a bad feeling, I have to sort of put it up for scrutiny. And this happened to me yesterday because I had a really good day. I had a great call with somebody who'd read my book, and he was just talking about all the things that I've written in my book. And he said, I feel as though I know you already because, I spent the whole of yesterday evening in your company. And it's like, oh, that's so cute. That's really nice. And then I had another really good call, and I had a call with a client, and they told me that they'd got these amazing wins and blah, blah. So I was feeling on quite a high at the end of the day. And then I just checked my Facebook at the end of the day, and somebody put this really mean and spiteful comment below a post that I put on Facebook. Like, I'm not impressed by you. And I'm like, what? That is like some horrible kind of troll just saying really nasty things about me just because they can. And of course, sometimes people do things or something happens and it takes you unawares, and it does impact you. And we're not Teflon. We are emotional creatures. And in that particular instance, I had to say, look, all those people that I spoke to yesterday, they either wanted to work with me or they are working with me, or, they appreciate me. They are there in my world for a positive reason. This guy, on the other hand, he hasn't paid me. He has no intention of paying me. He has no intention of getting to know me better. He is just somebody whose opinion doesn't count. But if I had just said, oh, I've got a bad feeling, push it down, just go and have a drink or something, then I wouldn't have actually had that opportunity for reflection. And, it still hurts a little bit. It still does. But I think it is important to be honest with ourselves and not actually wallow in that victimhood, but at the same time, just, we have to learn to accept all of our feelings, don't we? Good and bad, even though none of us like feeling those bad feelings. And isn't that just part of resilience?
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting. Feelings are, I think we need to be really aware of our feelings, and they're really, they tell us something, but they're interesting feelings. And we've got to be really careful, because the feeling of excitement is the same feeling of being nervous. And it's sometimes how we frame that sort of feeling. And so, but also when I get certain feelings, it's almost, I ask myself, what's the wisdom in this feeling?
Uh-huh.
What's this? What's he telling me? And so almost it becomes a thing to sort of inform me of something. And like, say you were going to, I don't know, jump off a high cliff into the water type of thing. And no matter how it is, it's quite a scary thing, isn't it, to do that? Unless some people love that sort of thing. But before you go, you get this feeling of like, oh, I feel nervous. Actually, that's okay, because your body's in a protective mode. There's a bit of wisdom, and so I would say, what's the wisdom? Actually, the wisdom is I perhaps need to just make sure I run fast enough to clear the edge. The wisdom is I got to watch there's a little bump there. Actually, got to make sure I get over that. I don't trip. Yeah. So actually, feelings can be really a sign. And it's interesting. I was talking to my daughter recently, actually, and we were talking about, she was feeling really like low one day and all a bit flat. And I'd already told her this thing. If you feel a bit like blur, I always say 3 things you need to check for. Have you eaten enough? Have you drank enough? Have you slept enough? Sounds really basic, but these are our basic needs of life. And she said to me, she was feeling a bit blur the other day, and she did those 3 little checks, and she realized she'd probably not eaten enough. So she had something to eat, and then she felt much better. And so it's sometimes feelings and a bit rubbish can be just a physiological thing of saying, just look after yourself and have some sort of sleep and water and food. So just be mindful. But, people obviously sharing horrible comments like they did, we know, as much as we know that's just a projection of their own internal world, it's still hard. But as you say, it's good to, acknowledge it, because that's okay to go, do you know what? I feel horrible today because somebody's been like this. And it's good to acknowledge that's okay. But as you say, as long as you don't start to dwell too much and think, oh, I'm terrible here, and that's the only thing you think about. And that's the danger, isn't it? Where you get consumed by that one thought or that one thing. But actually, okay, and like you said, you went through all the other things, which almost wiped it away, all the positive stuff that came through that day as well.
Yeah. It's always easy. I think I read somewhere that something like 80% of our thoughts left unchecked are negative. So we are hardwired as humans, aren't we, to be self-critical, I mean, look, sometimes I think, do you know what, Jane? If I was your boss, I don't think I would be a very good boss. I think I drive myself really, really hard. And if somebody else was driving me that hard, I would probably feel very rebellious because I think I'm too hard on myself. And that is a very, very common thing. I think it's hard to be kind on ourselves, isn't it? But the world of business is also quite a harsh one. And there will be times when we feel we get rejected. We don't win a piece of business if we have our own business that we were going to win, or even if we're in an organization, something doesn't go our way, our project or our idea is rejected, or somebody passes us over if we're looking for a promotion or something like. There's always something, isn't there? And that thing of actually being gentle on ourselves and being our own cheerleader, it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing being somebody who actually takes care of ourselves.
It is really hard. And if you gave the advice to somebody else, you would be far kinder to somebody else if they were talking about any example. And I think sometimes we need to step back and think, okay, if I was telling somebody else this, how would I say it to them? And I'd say this, I'd be nice, I'd be, be aware and be kind and all that. Yeah. And then we need to do that to ourselves. I agree. But as you say, all those like loser clients, or you don't win a client, all those things. What I do more and more now is, okay, what did I learn from that? What's the wisdom in it? And that enables me to be stepping forward. Doesn't mean I dismiss it and it's disappointing. That's okay to be disappointed. Oh, I was going to win that sort of business. okay, what can I learn? How I pitched it, how I engaged with them, what's the wisdom in it, what's next for me? And I did that. I remember I lost a big client last year, and my initial reaction was like, okay. And it was weird. The emotional thing took a few days to hit me. Initially, it was like, okay, what's the wisdom in that? What can I learn? What's it saying to me? What is it? Change of direction? Need to do things differently? And then the emotional thing came a few days later. I was a little bit like, sort of panic type of thing. But that's okay, and that's okay to share that, because that's thinking that's real. It's human. We feel things like that. That sort of survival instinct is almost kicking in. But I think it's important to, as you say, acknowledge those emotions. It's okay just not to dwell on those.
Yeah, and dwelling on emotions is, again, something that a lot of people do. Because it's fine in theory to say, well, don't dwell on emotions. But in reality, being the creatures that we are, we do. And, I often think about, I've got animals. So I've got two dogs. No, I've got one dog and two cats. And the dog, well, we do love dogs, don't we?
Yeah.
So the thing about dogs is that they're always happy to see you. They're always grateful if you take them out or you give them a toy or something like that. And as long as their physical needs are met, they're just not bothered by anything. That's why we love dogs on the whole. That is obviously if they've been brought up properly and haven't, been mistreated or anything. And as for cats, I think they're fantastic role models for us, because they just laze around the whole time. They don't have to do anything to prove their worth. And I always think, that's why I like cats, because I always feel as though I've got to prove my worth. I was brought up to feel as though I have to prove my worth to everybody all the time. And it is quite a strain, and sometimes I would like to be more cat-like, and just be the person that never had to prove my worth to anybody. But those kind of recurring thoughts of I have to raise the bar. It's part of my identity. I have to create value for people. I have to be entertaining. I have to be interesting. I have to be charming. I have to get them to like me, and I have to make money. And if I don't do any of those things, then somehow I am not a worthwhile human being, and I'm just going to disappear. And and I think that, that's our essential psychological makeup is something that sometimes it's a little bit like a rock that we carry around on our backs, isn't it?
No, and I think that whole, making us that self-worth and what value we offer and all that sort of stuff we talk about, and can I add some value to you and your person, organization and everything else, and that gets so knocked, doesn't it? And I talk a lot about where if you get clarity of this purpose piece for yourself as an individual, it does really help you, because it becomes something where you start to go to places where that becomes a reality and will resonate with other people, because you're very sort of focused then on what you do, and that really helps you. Then when you start engaging with your purpose and what you do, you don't need any sense of somebody patting on your back, because you just feel it internally, because you're just aligned to. When I'm coaching somebody or taking a team, we all want feedback, of course. There's elements of that, but I can just feel myself in that flow and resonating. And I think this is what I'm here to do. And I'm doing something I'm best at. It's when you're slightly outside of that, when it starts to become a little bit like unsure. You're not entirely sure what's going on. And then we start then sort of struggling with our confidence, don't we? And unsure about ourselves, and we feel about, I'm not very good, and wait for that feedback. They've not said anything. Are they going to say positive feedback or negative feedback? And what's going on there? And it can be quite challenging, can't it?
Yeah. And again, I think you just bringing it back all the time to sense of purpose. What you're saying essentially is that our purpose is really at the heart of our resilience. And as long as we are directed and driven by something that is greater than ourselves, which our purpose is, then all of those things which are, let's just say, our faulty wiring or external influences or little daily niggles or people being mean to us, all of those things, they just fall into context. I guess that's what it is really, isn't it?
Indeed it is, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Julian, what can I say? I have had another wonderful conversation with you. This has been so much fun and so interesting, and I will really cherish and value the time that we've spent together because we have had two fantastic conversations. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And before you go, let's just talk about your podcast again. It's Helping Organizations Thrive.
It is indeed, yes.
Yep.
And if you type that into Google, it will come up in terms of YouTube or iTunes, Spotify. It's all about interviewing leaders. And there's people like yourself on there, and there's entrepreneurs, there's world record holders on there, there's Paralympians, Olympians, all helping you to thrive from a leadership point of view and a resilience point of view with oodles of wisdom that is just amazing. And so, yeah, it's something I feel quite privileged when I've been doing 190 episodes out there now. So it's been going some time now. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, thank you for having me on. I've really loved our conversation. And it has been just a conversation, and that's been brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Lovely to see you again, Julian, and speak soon. Bye for now. Jane Bayler is the Smart Connector, a London-based, passionate serial entrepreneur, brand marketer and business growth exploder who helps overlooked and undervalued consultants and sector experts generate consistent, scalable revenues through becoming the go-to choice of their dream clients. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate you liking, rating, and reviewing the podcast on the platform you've heard it on. And check out the links in the show notes if you'd like to connect with Jane or any of her guests in person. Thank you for listening and come back soon.